Hello, and welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and I'm a congenital amputee of the right hand. In this show, I will interview other amputees and allow them to tell you their incredible life stories. I'll also feature family members of amputees and others who support the amputee community, all in an effort to discuss the challenges and triumphs of those living with limb loss. So stick around and listen to inspirational stories and find out why we say, we're not stumped. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and today I've got a really great guest, a gentleman that I've known for a little while, not real well, but he was so gracious to have me on his podcast, Brent Wright. Brent is a certified prosthetist and orthotist with Eastpoint Prosthetics, and he's got a lot of things going on. We spent a few minutes talking before the podcast actually started about what he's got with Life Enabled. He's got, like I said, he's got a podcast. He does 3D printing at a company called Advanced 3D. So many things going on. We're going to get into that today. So Brent, first of all, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, this is fun. And yeah, thank you for also when you came on and sharing your insight. I'll have to look back at the data, but I mean, that podcast, it was like a hockey stick going up. So I think it resonated with a lot of people. So thank you for being on.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, that's surprising to hear, and I very much appreciate that. You know, we always start the We're Not Stumped podcast with a segment we call In Your Own Words. So I'd like to know your story.
Yeah, so my story starts when I was a little kid. My parents were missionaries. My dad is an electrical engineer. My mom is an occupational therapist. I grew up in Ecuador, South America. Wow. And my dad was in charge of keeping electricity going to transmitters that transmitted across the world via shortwave. I don't know if you remember those days.
Yes.
And so I actually lived on the antenna farm for a nonprofit organization called HCJB World Radio. Wow. And so that is kind of where I got my love for people and from serving. It was really from my parents as they modeled that really sacrificially. My dad was an amazing person, an engineer. He actually worked at General Electric as a nuclear engineer, and back in the 70s, making really great money, which would be like, deep six figures nowadays. And he left it all behind to help the world with their electrical needs, specifically mission organizations. And so it's so great. And just like what you had said on your podcast, where your parents modeled what you want, that is it's so important. And that's what my parents did. And so as you know, missionaries, they don't make a lot of money, or maybe some people don't know, you rely on donations from very generous people, and usually in the United States, and home churches and that sort of thing. Well, one of those people was a gentleman by the name of Tony Plattner, who ran a company called Plattner Orthopedic Company in Illinois. And so I remember being home for a short period of time, and our home being the U.S., and I went and visited his office in the second grade. I'll never forget. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. And sure enough, that's what I set my mind to do. So anyway, that is kind of my journey in. I started off as a technician in high school, and then I went to college. I have a business degree because Tony has said that clinicians make the worst businessmen. And so I wanted to make sure I didn't make that mistake. And then I went back to being a technician, went to school in California, and did my residency in Charlotte, North Carolina, and kind of the rest is history from there. So that was my journey, and the why of how I got in the field is, and I really think it's just a combination of what my mom did with the occupational therapy and her creativity, and my dad's side with engineering.
I'm going to jump ahead because I always like to ask this question, but I usually ask it a little bit later in the podcast. Since you've been in the industry for so long, what are some of the advancements? What are some of the changes that you've seen in the industry?
Well, I mean, the first thing that really jumps out to me is liners, the mid to late 90s. That made a big difference in not only fitting, but comfort for a lot of patients. And so that was like mid 90s. I remember when I was a technician at that point, I was hand making what's called P-light liners, which was a foam. Then you have to glue these things up and grind them a certain way. Uh, and, you know, you didn't have to do that after you did this with gel liners. And so I think that's like, if there were marks in time, that's definitely one. And then really the digital technology as well has exploded from about 2015 on. And that's a big time set in time too, even though the technology has been in orthotics and prosthetics since mid to late 80s, 1980s. It really hasn't caught on, and materials and all that stuff haven't been until really within the last 10 years or so.
And when I look at, I was telling you a little earlier, I went to the 2022 Amputee Coalition, and as opposed to the old prosthetic I have in the back, the advancements are just amazing. And it looks to me like, especially upper limb, where they have actual hands that move and do so many things for people like me. Is there a difference between the advancements in upper lower? Or is it just more of they're kind of going at the same pace?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, so the upper stuff, I would say the speed and some of the myoelectric stuff has definitely improved. So you have companies like Psionic that have just wicked fast motion, individual fingers, super strong. You can see their commercials where they're like punching through bricks, throwing arms off roofs and all that, and still putting them on. So that sort of stuff is interesting. But the overall technology, I would say, is the same. The lower extremity side of things, there's been advancements in the material side with the 3D printing inside, but I think there's been a real, even a greater understanding of socket design and interface with the patient. What's been interesting is that the socket design, when the liners hit, which was the mid 90s, socket design didn't actually change with it. It stayed the same. And it really wasn't until probably the early 2000s where companies started being like, hey, we've got this extra interface that makes it more comfortable. Maybe we should think about how we can use that to our advantage and to the patient's advantage in the design side of things. So I think that's been one of the interesting things with lower extremity. So not necessarily the pieces and parts, but the actual thoughtfulness around the interface with the patient.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I mean, like I said, I was just blown away when I saw the advancements from my perspective, and it's just great to see because so many people need this. And talk about great things. We talked a little earlier about your Life Enabled, and I'll say what it is. Hope begins with Prosthetist, provider of innovative prosthetic solutions for the developing world. Tell us about that. That was a great story.
Yeah, so Life Enabled is an interesting byproduct of actually my parents as well. So my dad, he still travels all over the world to mission hospitals, installing electrical equipment and such. And at the end of those days where they've worked hard and all that, they're usually at a table sharing a meal with other people, and they'll say, "Hey, what do your kids do?" And so, my one sister is very high up in the CDC. My other is a nurse anesthetist, and then he would come to me, and he does prosthetics. He's a prosthetist, and they're like, "When can he come? We need him right now." And so my dad would volunteer my services pretty much at every hospital that he would ever go to. And I said, "Dad, I appreciate that and all that, but one thing that I've learned is I think it's most important in any of this is to really invest time and resources into one area, and you grow relationships not only with a hospital but with your patients, so you're there for them, and they know that you're coming back." And so I said, "Dad, just pick your favorite hospital, and that's where we'll go." And so there's this little hospital in the northern part of Guatemala, in the Petén region, which is jungle, very jungly, hot, humid, all that stuff, mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds, that sort of thing. And that's where the journey started. He said that I just love what they do for the community and such. So we partner with a hospital called Hospital Shalom there. And we've been there since 2006. served hundreds and hundreds of patients. And one of the things that we focus on, we believe that the children are the future. And so we make sure that kids get prostheses. We'll stay up late, we'll work late, whatever. And we've seen the difference a prosthesis makes to a kid, and we've done multiple as they grow. And so these kids that were missing all limbs or one limb, instead of begging on the side of the street, now we're starting to see them graduating college, accountants, nurses, teachers, all this stuff because of this device that they got when they were a little kid, and then we stuck with them, right, as they grew and such. And so that's the power of prosthesis. But you talk about changing a family tree because of that. So now the person that would typically be begging on the street is actually providing for their family because they have a real live job. I think that's the coolest thing.
That is really cool. What an amazing story. And I have a question about that because, like in America, and I don't even know the breakdown. I'm not sure anyone knows the breakdown even in America. As far as accidents, medical, or congenital for limb loss, from your perspective, are there differences in the percentages there as opposed to here? Is it more medical there, more congenital here? I'm just asking your opinion on that. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to see the data. I mean, there is a lot of crazy congenital stuff there just because of the nutrition and sanitation of water, availability of food, and that sort of thing. So there's some things that you would see there that you would never see here in the U.S., maybe in West Virginia, but I'm kidding. You could take that out if you need to. No, I'm kidding.
I love it. It's fun.
So anyway, and you do have to get a passport to go to West Virginia, right? I think that's the case. No, but you're just not going to see those things in the U.S. So, and then there's other things like snake bites. These snakes are no joke in Guatemala. They have one called the yellow-bearded dragon, and they call it a two-stepper because the venom moves so fast that you die very, very quickly. So if somebody gets bit by this snake, they're literally taking parts of your body off just to save your life. And so we see that. We see a lot of electrocution where, electrical wires are just buried in the ground. A kid's around and they hit the wire by accident and it has a charge on it, and it will cause an amputation. There's just all kinds of crazy things like that aren't necessarily going to happen here. But then you do see diabetes, because of their diet, corn tortillas and beans and high carbohydrates. You see that there, and just a lack of education around what causes diabetes and how the amputation happens is probably very similar. The downside, and this is the crazy part, it'll blow your mind. So doctors, let's say if you have diabetes and you stepped on something and you've got gangrene of your toe, they will actually take your leg off above the knee. They won't just take the toe. They won't take a foot. They want to make sure that you heal up and that you don't show up in their hospital again. And the way they do that is it's a very basic surgery, so you go between essentially your knee, and they just take your leg off right there, and they know you're going to heal, have plenty of blood flow. So the incidence of above the knee amputees is a lot, at least in Guatemala. So that's one of the interesting challenges that we have to face is that's a whole nother level of fitting for patients, and a whole nother level of expense when you start adding a knee joint and that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. I knew there wasn't going to be necessarily data, but having your perspective was very interesting. I had never heard of those snakes or mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds. I mean, that's a little different. That's crazy. As far as your podcast, which I was very honored to be on, I do want to talk about that. You have a partner, George Peels, and it's the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast. I apologize, I'm a little under the weather today, but it's in its 7th season. So you've done quite a bit on that, and you've really reached a great audience. Talk about that. Talk about that podcast.
Yeah. So what's interesting is I was Joris Peels, and I met a while ago.
I apologize if I mispronounced his name.
No, he goes by both. But
okay,
we and I say it both ways. So, but we met a while ago, and really it revolved around he appreciated what we did in with Life Enabled. And so
Yeah.
I was on his podcast with a guy named Max Bogue, who is the developer of the 3D printing pen. And Joris is a consultant for big companies. So, like a company like General Electric may say, "Hey, Joris, can you see? We think we can. We think we want to print this. Is there technology out there right now that can do that?" And so, like, he will go out and find something, and he'll come back with his evaluation. And a lot of times they listen. And so he's been in the field for a long time. He knows the trends. He knows the who's selling snake oil, who's doing the real
Yeah.
thing, that sort of thing. And so we just really hit it off. Um and then we just decided, hey, let's try this. And so we started trying to come up with all kinds of, catchy titles and all that. And he's like, let's just call it the Orthotics and Prosthetics podcast, because that is the most natural thing, and we can cover so many things under that. And so that's what it was. So not super creative, but what I love about the spirit of the podcast is the spirit of learning. I've learned so much on it. The people that we have on, from physical therapists to clinicians to vendors, engineers, entrepreneurs, researchers, um, professors, education people. It's been neat, and it's been eye opening to see what they come up with, and see something through their eyes. And maybe it's because I'm getting a little more gray, and listening a little bit more. But it's so important. I think it, for our younger generation of clinicians, is uh, don't overlook the people with crow's feet that are still in the field. And in fact, embrace those people. I mean, the people like me may get on, the young people's nerves, but our full intention is to grow this next generation of prosthetists and orthotists to be an amazing generation. And it's going to take everybody together. And that's what excites me about the podcast, is that I hope that we can bridge some of that. And one of the things that I want to do is also capture some of that knowledge from the people with more gray hair, so it is essentially something that somebody can always get back to. So I always want some little nugget that somebody can grab onto in each podcast. So that's the idea behind it.
Well, the title is very search engine optimization friendly. I mean, you can't deny that. We're not stumped necessarily isn't, but it's all good. One of the things I thought was really cool, though, when you had me on, I don't know if all the episodes are like this, but Joris didn't know who I was or anything about me, and you introduced me, had me on, and his questions were just both of your questions were just awesome, because we kind of talked about the fact that I don't wear a prosthetic and why. And I'll tell you what, though, I'm starting to go to the other side. I mean, I see all the advancements, and I talk to people like you. It's like, maybe it's time to give that a shot again.
Yeah. So, and that's what I love. I mean, his perspective. He does it really, what he's learned about orthotics and prosthetics has been from the show and his questions, and he's genuinely curious.
Yeah.
And but he'll also prod. So like that question to you is like, hey, you want to work for an insurance company and deny people getting arms? Because I mean, what better way to make a few bucks on the side than to do something like that? And but those are types of things, like, I guarantee you an insurance company has thought of that. I mean, that's just how they are. But I love that, and I love his curiosity. So that is part of the show. Is I get the people on, and he has no idea who they are, and then it's this exploration of who this person is. And yeah, for instance, a couple episodes ago, it's not aired yet, but uh, he didn't know that I picked up one of his old friends, essentially, and I didn't know that. And so like this guy pops up and he goes, "Dude, we haven't talked in forever."
Oh, I can't wait to hear
And so
that one.
that was a really really good one as well. So that's kind of the fun part of it. And we're in two different spots. He has a worldview that is not part of the U.S. system, And I think that is very, very interesting. And the other cool thing is, so we've been listened to in over 80 countries, and over 40% of our audience is outside of the United States.
Wow.
And I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
But I think he's a big part of that draw, not only because he's yours, but because he has a different perspective as well.
And where is he located again? Was it Spain?
Spain, yep. Okay. Valencia, Spain, yep.
Just wanted to make sure I had that correct. Yeah, it was such a fun time being on your podcast. Again, thank you. What is something that you've learned by working with so many different people going through limb loss, whether it be congenital, accident, medical? What have you learned by talking to so many people through your years?
Man, there's so many things that I can point to, but I would say, the biggest thing is you are your own advocate. Yeah. I can't stress that enough. Like, I want the best for my patients. But, there's so much paperwork and all that stuff that goes into getting these things even paid for or what have you. And there's so many people as part of the team. And those people are human. And sometimes you have to play the quarterback of your own care. As much as I would love to say I'm perfect and your doctor's perfect and all that, the reality is they have stacks of paper up to their desk and yours is somewhere down in here. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease a lot of time to get the paperwork done. So I would say, you are your own advocate. That's part of it. And the other part is you have a choice in the care that you receive. Somebody coming to me, it might not be the right fit. I might not be the right personality for you. I think I make good prostheses, but a very wise person once told me the fit of the prosthesis starts between the ears. And that's so true. So if you don't think I have your best interest in mind, or there's some part that you're uncomfortable about, then I'm probably not the right fit for you. But once you find that person, you hang on to them for dear life, and you hope they never retire or what have you, because they become, more than just a patient at that point, or your leg provider. They start becoming friends, and that's a unique part about the care is like that dynamic as well, because things happen after hours. And you're going to have to call, and you have to be comfortable calling them. And, the worst thing for me is if a patient of mine says, Brent, I just waited till Monday to call you because I knew you're busy. Like, that's the wrong answer. You call me and let's get this done. It might be early morning, late afternoon, whatever it is, but we'll connect and we'll get you taken care of. And that's just what it's about.
What a great answer. I mean, being an advocate for yourself is huge. And I think about my situation where my parents provided for my prosthetics when I was younger, but there's other people on their own journeys, and you couple those journeys, medical and accident, like we talked about, and they're getting thrust into this new world that they have no idea. And especially like the fit of the socket, to your point, you have to be that squeaky wheel, as you said. Hey, this doesn't feel right. And if you have that relationship, to your point, I mean, that relationship's got to be extremely important, I would imagine. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love about the field. And there is a part, like, yes, the interface is important, but you also want to connect with somebody that feels like they're going to push the boundaries of what is possible. So the interfaces, the types of materials. A good question nowadays for me, like if I was a new patient, even if the clinician doesn't use 3D printing, I would ask, well, what do you think about 3D printing? That'll give you an idea of how the clinician thinks about the technologies, and you'll learn a lot from the answer, and it might be the right answer, or they might like brush it off and say, oh well, it's just not there yet, which is not true, and social media has shown that to not be true. And then I would steer clear of working with somebody like that. But that, I mean, to me, that would be a great question to ask, because you'll actually hear the heart behind how they make some decisions around what they bring in their clinic.
I actually did want to ask about 3D printing to you, because I think your perspective would be much more than I know. So you own, if I'm saying this correctly, advanced 3D printing, is that correct?
Yeah, so myself and two other partners, Paul Sugg and Tyler Sugg, own Advanced 3D, and we 3D print a myriad of things. We so automotive,
Oh,
even
wow.
pieces on planes, consumer goods. I've just recently printed some earrings and watch casings and things of that nature. And then we do prostheses as well. And yeah, so I'm really excited about what the future has for 3D printing.
Yeah, as along with the myoelectric and some of the other things, the 3D printing has to be one of the biggest advancements, I would imagine, too, in your field.
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
So the reason why I say no, so I do believe it's a big advancement, but the way we use it is not that advanced. So I've heard somebody say, so you're kind of like printing black and white TVs.
Hmm.
So we're
Interesting.
printing things the same way that we've always made things. And so what excites me though about 3D printing is we're able to make things that we weren't able to do in traditional fabrication. And I believe that's where 3D printing needs to be used. So for example, um, I believe that a prosthesis should be as close to a living, breathing thing like the person that it's going on, and that includes flexibility. So we uh, gain weight and lose weight throughout the
Yeah.
day, water weight, and the prosthesis needs to be able to accommodate that.
Wow.
And there's certain ways to do that, but with some of these materials coming out now, um, it's very very possible. The flexibility is incredible, and just over the last couple months, I've been fitting some of these sockets, and the feedback has been um, I just doesn't it blows my mind, doesn't make sense. So like these sockets that I'm making, you can literally kind of fold them in on themselves, and but patients put them on and they say they feel more stable in the sockets than something rigid, something that completely encases them.
Huh.
It defies all logic, and so I'm definitely digging in to that. And I just recently had a case with a veteran. It's not my patient, and they were walking him out to his car, and he said he stopped and got real emotional. And he said, "This is the first time I've worn my prosthesis and can feel the wind on my arm."
Wow.
And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. That kind of human connection, as you said, what you do with Life Enabled. So what is next for Brent when you look into the future, 5, 10, 15 years?
What is next? So, I mean, I think continuing to grow advanced 3D, we want to be the premier go-to place for the specific type of printing that we do. There's other people that 3D print, and they're also as important as what we do. But what we're doing is, I mean, it's like it's some next level stuff. So it's like if you're going levels up, we're playing with some of these materials, and we're designing specifically for these materials with tools that are expensive, but being no, it's not just about the tools; it's about being able to use them. And we just have a team that can not only has the tools but can use them and then also produce the outcomes on that side. And we're growing, little by little, very organically, and the right people that work with us are the people that see the outcomes. Um, you know, I typically know if somebody is the right fit if they start asking, okay, the more of the technical questions. So tell me a little bit more about the flexible socket. What was the feedback you got? How do you design that sort of thing? Instead of, well, how much is that?
Hmm.
And if that's the first question out, I really I'm looking for my way out of that conversation, because at that point it's not about price. The reality is it the your margin or whatever is still going to be there with the technology that we use. But if that's the first question, then there's still another hurdle you've got to get over.
And that makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to have links to all of your properties in the description, but your podcast in particular, what's the URL to that?
It is TPOP. So it's TPOpodcast.com. So
Excellent.
it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I have it pulled
podcast,
up.
.com.
And what about advanced 3D printing? If that's something that people want to get a hold of you on, is there a way to do that?
So yeah, I can give you our link. It's adv3dinc.com. It's deliberately a very generic page. And so, like, I would say, if you really want to work with us, don't reach out through the website. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we'll connect.
I was going to ask you about that because you're very active on LinkedIn, and I really enjoy everything you do. So, is it better for people that try to get a hold of you that way, or?
I would, that's the best way, and what a great way for sharing, everything. I'm super proud of other clinicians and companies that are sharing on LinkedIn for the betterment of our field. I think it makes a big difference.
It really does. Like I said, you're doing so many great things. A person that has more than a prosthetic in probably 40 years is thinking about doing it. So you're doing a lot of great things. Thank you so much for your time today. I learned so much being on your podcast, and certainly having you on as a guest. And I can't thank you enough for taking your time to be on the We're Not Stumped podcast.
Oh, this has been great. Yeah, thank you so much. And look forward to continuing to hear your journey and what you're up to as well.
Thank you.
That was the We're Not Stumped podcast, hosted by Mike Boland. If you want to be a guest on the program, reach out to Mike at his email address, mike@mikeboland.com. This podcast is produced by One Hand Man Productions. If you are looking to start your podcast, go to onehandmanproductions.com.